chapter 17. While you are turning there, we have a brand new nation, the nation of Israel. And they crossed the Red Sea, or the Sea of Reeds, and God made his final judgment against the Egyptians and their gods when they didn't make it across the sea. And the Israelites are now free from their oppressors after 400 years. And the result of this is an increasing faith in Yahweh and Moses, and they celebrate this with the singing, the dancing, and the tambourines. And then after 3 more days of wilderness trekking, they find themselves out of water. And they manage to find some bitter water in a place called Mara, which means bitter. And in spite of all they've experienced of God's power and his protection over them, they demonstrate how their faith is still not quite up to snuff. But after Moses throws a log into the bitter water, it turns sweet. That just proves once again that God is able to provide for their needs. And this is a teachable moment here. And God lays out his if-then plan for them in the form of statutes. And then following this, God leads them to Elim, a refreshing place of springs and palm trees. And their next test comes after 1 month of hiking, and they're in the wilderness of sin, and they run out of food. And this leads them to accuse Moses of bringing them out to the desert to die, and makes their condition of slavery in Egypt seem more appealing than it had seemed. God's solution is to bring them a night of quail gathering, and in the morning manna. And God gives them specific instructions on how to gather and deal with this manna, and of course they fail this test too. But here they're introduced to the principle of generosity and God's Sabbath pattern of work and rest. And this manna is going to sustain them for the next 40 years until they come to the border of the Promised Land. So let's go ahead and read. Trevor, do you want to start with verses 1 through 4, please?
Chapter 17?
Yes.
The entire Israelite community left the wilderness of sin, moving from one place to the next according to the Lord's command. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. So the people complained to Moses, "Give us water to drink." "Why are you complaining to me?" Moses replied to them. "Why are you testing the Lord?" But the people thirsted there for water and grumbled against Moses. They said, "Why did you ever bring us up from Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst?" Then Moses cried out to the Lord, "What should I do with these people? In a little while they will stone me."
So they pack up and move on, and apparently God's given them some instructions on how to move out in an orderly manner by stages. And they get to their last stop on the way to Mount Sinai. But when they get to this place called Rephidim, they're out of water once again. And true to form, they blame Moses, accusing him of bringing him out into the desert to die. And they're so angry with him that they threaten to stone him. And that's pretty serious. And he directs their attention back to the Lord once again, and accuses them of testing the Lord. Now, remember, their relationship with God is still in its infancy here. And although they've seen more things in their short amount of time than all of us will see in our lifetime, most likely. So I want to take a look at a passage from Psalms. Trevor, did I give that to you? Psalm 95. Where did I get that? Rick? Okay.
Psalm 95, 6 through 9. Come, let us bow down and worship. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker. For he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture, the flock under his care. Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as you did at Meribah, and as you did that day at Massah in the desert, where your fathers tested and tried me, though they had seen what I did.
So this is a description of what's going on here among the people. And in spite of all that they've experienced, because of the hardening of their hearts, they're putting God to the test. And this hardening of the hearts is the exact same problem that the Egyptians had with and their Pharaoh. Pharaoh didn't believe the God of the Hebrews was anything to pay attention to. It's as if their God was nothing. And here the Israelites are saying, God, are you really there? And that's the test to which they're putting God. And Moses' response is, why are you still doubting? But Moses is just doing what God instructed him to do. And remember, they are being led by the cloud and the fire. Moses isn't doing the leading. And no one is being forced to follow. They're doing this of their own free will. And we don't have a cloud and we don't have the fire, but we have the book. And we follow it out of our own free will. We follow in faith. And that's part of what faith is. And that is a natural expectation of God. And when we venture outside the lines, we do it of our own free will. And God's will for us is to stay inside the lines because that's where we're protected. It's like our umbrella. We stay under it and we stay dry. And we venture out and we get soaked. So,
I was going to ask a quick question before
Sure.
we move on. So, Israel for 400 years has lived under the Egyptian system. They're used to being pretty much just subjugated to that. Everything provided is provided by them. It's basically, their protection is provided by the Pharaoh, the food, the straw, everything is just kind of like managed, and they basically just respond. They're not super self-sufficient, so they're used to that kind of regime. And I'm just thinking, now the template is now they're out there, and their known leader now isn't Pharaoh, it's now Moses in their mind. Now God does some amazing things, and God does these amazing things. He brings them through the water. He provides at Meribah. He provides these things, and they still struggle. Every time it's like, oh, it's not here. What's going on? You're not doing it, and it's like, and they're all angry at Moses. So just at the drop of a hat. And when reading it from the outside, for me, I come to this conclusion. It's like, how could you forget what just happened? How could you? But for them, it's a journey. To your talk, and you mentioned it. It's like that relationship is still really in its infancy, and so there's not a lot of maturity there in that growth that says that like Moses would say, I know he's going to provide. I know he's going to come through. I know that he didn't just lead us out here to die. But they're not there yet. They're there still thinking, you just brought us out here to die. No, you don't care about us. After everything that's just gone on, that's their attitude. And it's just like, and Moses is just ready to throw his hands up every time, like, you gotta be kidding me.
that's right.
And I think that happens with sometimes newer Christians or Christians who are still trying to grow. There's that instant frustration, and I would think as a church leader, you kind of go through this, oh my gracious, it's like after all that God's just done for you, and you're still like trying to, and it's like, but that's just where they are, and and thank goodness God's making that call on patience, not me, it's like, because I had to go through that too.
Sure. Well, and I think that this is kind of a picture here of how people grow in their faith.
Yeah.
And it's a process. And we're not immune to this either, even as long as we have been believers. God helped me through this last time, but there's still that thing in the back of your mind, is he gonna do it this time?
Right.
And I think that what the big thing is God's will for our lives, is that we grow in our faith. We learn, and we learn to trust in more and more.
Right.
And this is what you see here, and it's trust and fail, trust and fail, trust and fail, and that's the way you grow.
Right.
And how many times have you wondered if God was going to come through for you, and then he does, and you think, why in the world did I ever doubt that? And you feel kind of sheepish or worse. And okay.
Well, I thought it was interesting too, you pointed out that they had free will. You wonder how many of them thought about turning around going back, but then, oh yeah, how do I get across the sea?
Yeah, how do I get back?
Could you reopen that again?
Yeah.
Just a second.
I was listening to something yesterday, and I don't remember exactly what it was, but it kind of pointed out that when we have a mountaintop experience, oftentimes we have a low following. I think maybe because we're so excited seeing what God has done, that we want him to keep doing it. I don't know.
Right. Okay, Rick, would you read 5 through 7, please?
The Lord answered Moses, "Walk on ahead of the people. Take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go. I will stand there before you by the rock of Hebron. Strike the rock, and water will come out of it for the people to drink." So Moses did this in the sight of the elders of Israel, and he called the place Mashah and Meribah, because the Israelites quarreled, and because they tested the Lord, saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?"
So God gives Moses some more instructions, and he tells Moses to gather up some of the leaders and take them on a hike outside the camp and up ahead a ways. And then, by the way, Moses, take the staff because you're going to need it again. And so God leads them to a place at Horeb, and you'll recall in chapter 3, and we're going to see this again in chapter 18, that Horeb is identified as the mountain of God. And remember, it could also have been a place name, an area where the mountain of God is located. But whatever that is, the location is where Mount Sinai is. Okay, so God tells Moses to strike the rock on which God is standing, and he does it, it outflows water. Okay, now I'm gonna give you a little information here regarding shepherds and their ability to find water in this arid land. And this is something that Moses would have learned during his time tending sheep, and I have no idea if it relates to anything here, but it's kind of interesting, okay? Now, in that land, it's in many places, there is a, underneath the topsoil, there is a layer of limestone. And when it rains, the water will percolate down to that layer. And then wherever there is a wadi, a dry riverbed, the rain, the water then can leach out and run down the sides of the wadi. But at certain times when it's dry, the minerals in the water form a crust right here. And the shepherds know where that is, and it's visible. And if they hit that, if they beat on that and break that crust, water runs out. Okay? And so they still do that today. That's how the shepherds can find water in dry areas. Now remember, it doesn't rain very often, but when it does, water will collect right there. And then it can run out.
So there's always a hole, and it's at the edge of the hole?
Well, this represents a dry riverbed.
Oh, okay.
Okay, a cut,
Okay, I see.
a gully.
That must have been a lot of water, I was thinking about it, for 1 million people to come out and the rock.
And
Well,
animals.
yeah, on our second trip to Israel, we hiked up one of these canyons, and you can see this. You can see it on the side of the hill. You can see the water wasn't running out at the time, but you could see how the signs that there had been water running down the side of that.
Hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah, okay, so anyway, like I said, this may have absolutely nothing to do with this episode. Okay. But, so back to the text here now. Some implications offered by commentators. By standing on the rock and instructing Moses to strike it, he's ordering Moses to symbolically strike him. And that God is the source then of life-giving water. And this seems to be the idea behind Paul's description of this in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Now, did I give that to you, Nancy, or
No.
Trevor? Okay.
All right, 1 Corinthians 10, 1 through 4. Now, I do not want you to be unaware, brothers and sisters, that our ancestors were all under the cloud, all passed through the sea, and all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. They all ate the same spiritual food and all drank the same spiritual drink. For they drank from the spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ.
Okay. All right, so Paul described a rock as Jesus himself, and we know that Jesus tells us that he is the source of life-giving water. Okay. So Moses gives the place 2 names, and I guess because one name wouldn't cover it all, but Massa means testing and Meribah means quarreling. Okay. So, all right, April, could you read 8 through 13?
The Amalekites came and attacked the Israelites at Rephidim. Moses said to Joshua, "Choose some of our men and go out to fight the Amalekites. Tomorrow I will stand on top of the hill with the staff of God in my hands." So Joshua fought the Amalekites as Moses had ordered, and Moses, Aaron, and Hur went to the top of the hill. As long as Moses held up his hands, the Israelites were winning, but whenever he lowered his hands, the Amalekites were winning. When Moses' hands grew tired, they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. Aaron and Hur held his hands up, one on one side, one on the other, so that his hands remained steady till sunset. So Joshua overcame the Amalekite army with the sword.
While the Israelites were still camped at Rephidim, they experienced their first battle on their way to the Promised Land, and it's not going to be their last. And this one is against the Amalekites. Now, these Amalekites were descendants of Esau. Remember, he lost his birthright to his twin brother Jacob, and maybe is still a little animosity here. Grudges could be held a long time in Middle Eastern cultures. And the Amalekites occupied at various times the area between the northern Sinai and the southern end of the Dead Sea. So this area right in here is where they're from. So it looked like they might have had to come a ways to fight with the Israelites. And I'm guessing that word had gone out, and they were nervous enough about this new kid on the block to make a preemptive strike. Now, the hostility against the Jews from the outside began in Egypt. And the Egyptians tried to prevent them from leaving. And here the Amalekites are trying to prevent them from entering here. So, but anyway, we have the first mention of Joshua as one singled out for his ability. And we know there's going to be a lot more to come from him. In fact, he's going to get a whole book named after him. But here he's going to select and lead a fighting force against the Amalekites. So Moses, along with Aaron and Hur, they head up the top of a hill that's overlooking the battle site, presumably for its visible location to those below. And while the battle's going on, Moses is holding up the staff of God. And this is the same staff that was used in the plagues and the crossing of the sea and the striking of the rock for water. And as long as the staff was raised, the battle went their way. And notice that Moses had a little help in this. And I've come to believe that this is a good description of the relationship between the elders of a church and its pastoral staff. I believe that one of the jobs of the elders is to hold up the arms of their pastors, or to support them in much the same way that Aaron and Hur supported the arms of Moses and helped them win the battle. And where it says in verse 13 that Joshua overcame Amalek with the sword, it literally says with the mouth of the sword. And this is an idiom. And it's an idiom for mercilessly or harshly, meaning a total domination. And so with God's help, the Israelites win the day decidedly. Okay, so dear, you want to read 14 through 16?
Okay. Then the Lord said to Moses, write this in a book as a memorial, and recite it to Joshua, that it will be utterly blot out, that I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. And Moses built an altar and named it, "The Lord is my banner." And he said, "The Lord has sworn, the Lord will have war against Amalek from generation to generation."
After the battle, God gives some instructions to Moses, and these instructions are to both write down and to pass on to Joshua orally, something to be handed down through the ages. And that God intends to eliminate any memory of the Amalekites. And although it doesn't say exactly why God wants to do this here, we can get this from another place in Scripture, and that's from Deuteronomy chapter 25. Do you have that, Nancy?
17 through 19. Never forget what the Amalekites did to us, to you, as you came from Egypt. They attacked you when you were exhausted and weary, and they struck down those who were straggling behind. They had no fear of God. Therefore, when the Lord your God has given you rest from all of your enemies in the land, he's giving you as a special possession, you must destroy the Amalekites and erase their memory from under heaven. Never forget this.
So while in their weariness from traveling, the Amalekites attacked them from behind. And now, who are those who would be at the back of the pack? Who would be back there? Children, women, elderly, sick, lame. Okay? So apparently there was a kind of unwritten code of chivalry that this was just not done. And it says that Amalek did not fear God. Even though word had made it through the grapevine of the things God had done for the Israelites, Amalek wasn't convinced that this God could be this powerful. And this is still an issue today. Because some just have no fear of what God's capable of doing. Because he hasn't done these things on a massive and highly visible scale lately. But it's coming, according to God's word. But Amalek had no fear that God would punish him for what he was about to do. And he was wrong. And there would be an enmity between God and Amalek for generations.
So they were not destroyed at the time of this war. The Amalekites stayed where they were until later, because then he's telling them when they get to the promised land,
Yeah,
that's when they're supposed to
they
get
have to
rid
do
of
it again.
Okay.
Yeah, they'd have to beat him again. Yeah.
So did they follow them?
I don't know whether they followed them or not, or whether they just encountered them again.
Ran home and hid. Oh,
Yeah.
Weren't the Amalekites from a specific area?
Yeah, but it was southern, it was this area here in the Negev,
Mm-hmm.
this area right down here, which was part of the area. The Hebrews occupied all the way down from Dan to Beersheba, which is south, just, it's probably right in here someplace.
Mm-hmm.
So, they had to overcome them again. Yeah.
I always forget that it's a small area there.
Yeah, really, it isn't very far. You're talking short distances in here. Remember, the whole nation of Israel is, you could fit it from top to bottom, Portland to Roseburg. It's just not, it's about as wide as the Willamette Valley. It's just not a big place. Okay, so, interesting. Other than what is in the Bible, there is no reference to the Amalekites in any ancient writings. None. It's the only place you will find any reference to them is what's in here. So, Moses piles up some rocks as a memorial and calls it "The Lord is my banner." And this is a reference to that battle standard of the flags that led armies into war. And I'm guessing this symbolizes the raising of the staff of God during the battle, a representation of the power of God to win the battle. And the message for us, whenever we raise the banner, the power of God is there as well.
Is this the first indication that Joshua was going to take over for Moses when he said, write it down for Joshua?
Yeah, well, this is the first time Joshua was mentioned.
I just was
He's
meaning.
he's given kind of a leadership position here.
Right.
He says, go out and pick your fighting men and go out and lead them into battle.
But where it says, read it aloud to Joshua, I will erase the memory of the Amalekite. Like, for future, when
Sure.
Joshua's gonna be the leader, then
Yeah.
you gotta remember this, because he's telling him to write it down for Joshua. It's
Yeah.
interesting that,
And Joshua was given not only the responsibility for the written word, but also to pass it on orally. Okay, chapter 18. Matt, you want to take 1 through 9?
Yes. Now Jethro, the priest of Midian and father-in-law of Moses, heard everything God had done for Moses and for his people Israel, and how the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. After Moses had sent away his wife Zipporah, his father-in-law Jethro received her and her 2 sons. One son was named Gershom, for Moses said, I have become a foreigner in a foreign land. And the other was named Eliezer, for he said, my father's God was my helper. He saved me from the sword of Pharaoh. Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, together with Moses' sons and wife, came to him in the wilderness, where he was camped near the mountain of God. Jethro had sent word to him, I, your father-in-law Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and her 2 sons. So Moses went out to meet his father-in-law and bowed down and kissed them. They greeted each other and then went into the tent. Moses told his father-in-law about everything the Lord had done to Pharaoh and the Egyptians for Israel's sake, and about all the hardships they had met along the way and how the Lord had saved them. Jethro was delighted to hear about all the good things the Lord had done for Israel in rescuing them from the hand of the Egyptians.
The Israelites went on from their encounter with the Amaleks at Rephidim to set up camp at Mount Sinai. There Moses is visited by his father-in-law Jethro, who brings Moses' wife and his 2 sons. Now the jungle telegraph was apparently functioning pretty well because Jethro had heard about the great escape from Egypt. And this had to have been a welcome sight after all the challenges Moses had faced with his own people and from the Amalekites. Now here are some people who actually liked him. And so they have this great reunion, and we see the respect that Moses had for Jethro and the greeting that he gave him. And Moses brings Jethro up to date on the events so far. And Jethro's response is to rejoice. Now, Jethro was a priest of Midian, but we aren't told to what god. And it was common for priests in those days to be affiliated with more than one god at a time. And this allowed for the recognition of the relative strengths of one god over another. But with this recounting by Moses, Jethro's getting a new picture of this amazing God of the Hebrews. And Moses does hear something that any of us can do, and that's to tell his story. People may not believe the things written in the Bible, but our story of what God has done for us is pretty hard to refute. And it's something we can do even if we can't recite chapter and verse. And you might recall the episode in chapter 4 when Moses was en route from Midian to Egypt, and Zipporah had to perform an emergency circumcision there. Only one son is mentioned there, and his name is a reference to Moses' time in Midian, but the other son's name represents Moses' protection from the hand of Pharaoh. And this could have been a reference to Moses' escape to Midian following his slaying of the Egyptian taskmaster here. Not that it really makes a whole lot of difference. Okay, Harvey, you want to take, yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on, first of all, when did Moses send Zipporah and his sons back to Midian, and why he would have done that?
It doesn't say. There is no reference to that.
Didn't, maybe they just stayed.
That's what I was.
Well, they started out on the journey
Because she
together.
had to circumcise.
Yeah, they started
That's
out on
right.
the journey, but at what point they were returned.
And in the culture or anything, that's what I was just wondering if there's any thoughts
No,
like that.
There's no reference as to how all of that happened. A great mystery.
Yeah?
Okay, Harvey, you want to read 10 through 12?
So Jethro said, Blessed be the Lord who delivered you from the land of the Egyptians and from the hand of Pharaoh, and who delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all the gods. Indeed, it was proven when they dealt proudly against the people. Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took a burnt offering and sacrifices for God, and Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat a meal with Moses' father-in-law before God.
So we're going to see something telling here in these verses. Either Jethro was not familiar with Yahweh, or he was, but considered him as just one of the gods and not necessarily even the greatest one of them. But as mentioned here, Jethro got a new appreciation of this God. This was the exact response God was trying to get from the Hebrews and the Egyptians. And even so, he still considered Yahweh as one of the pantheon, although now the greatest of the bunch. But we see here Jethro thought enough of Yahweh to offer up sacrifices to him. And this is something Jethro was probably familiar with in dealing with gods a God. And lastly, we see that Aaron brought the leaders of the Israelites to this meeting, and they all sat down for a meal together. And notice this meal was before God, and I'm not sure what that means, but I'll guess this meal was in honor of what God had done. And personally, I think eating is a great way to honor God. You've likely heard by now that sharing a meal in cultures of the Middle East has more significance to them than it does to us in our culture today, even though even for us there's something special about eating together. This is one of the reasons why Mike and Karen had begun a monthly potluck for the elders and the pastors and their wives. There's something bonding in that. And if you're part of a life group, this is something you might consider. And that's an occasional meal together. James, you want to read 13 through 18, please?
And it came about the next day that Moses sat to judge the people. And the people stood about Moses from the morning until the evening. Now when Moses' father-in-law saw that he was doing it for the people, he said, "What is this thing that you are doing for the people? Why do you alone sit as judge, and all the people stand about you from morning until evening?" And Moses said to his father-in-law, "Because the people come to me to inquire of God. When they have a dispute, it comes to me, and I judge between a man and his neighbor, and make known the statutes of God and his laws." And Moses' father-in-law said to him, "The thing that you are doing is not good. You will surely wear out both you yourself and these people who are with you, for the task is too heavy for you. You cannot do it alone."
So the day after this leadership dinner, Moses does apparently what he customarily does, and that's to sit in a judgment seat and render decisions on the issues that the people bring before him. And he uses what he knows of God's laws in rendering judgments. And we aren't told how or where he got these laws, because they hadn't been to the top of Mount Sinai yet. But somehow he knows something of God's expectations. And Jethro sees this, and he says to Moses, "What on earth are you doing? This is so inefficient. You'll work yourself to death." Okay, so Nancy, you want to read 19 through 23?
Sure. Now listen to me, and let me give you a word of advice, and may God be with you. You should continue to be the people's representative before God, bringing their disputes to him. Teach them, did I say you should or you should not? You should continue, okay. 20, teach them God's decrees and give them his instructions. Show them how to conduct their lives, but select from all the people some capable, honest men who fear God and hate bribes. Appoint them as leaders over groups of 1,000, 100, 50, and 10. They should always be available to solve the people's common disputes, but have them bring the major cases to you. Let the leaders decide the smaller matters themselves. They will help you carry the load, making the task easier for you. If you follow this advice, and if God commands you to do so, then you will be able to endure the pressures, and all these people will go home in peace.
So seeing this problem here, Jethro gives Moses some good advice. And you'll probably recognize this as a management technique here. It's called span of control. And the idea behind it is to limit the number of people that one person directly supervises. And in today's management practices, the thinking is that one person should limit themselves to directly supervising from between 3 and 7 people. And if one supervises less than 3, they're being inefficient. And if they're supervising more than 7, they're overburdened. And so let's break down Jethro's solution here. Now he says that Moses' job is to not be only a representative of the people before God, but to represent God and his laws and statutes and ways to the people. So Moses is to be a middleman between God and the people here, communicating in both directions. And that's what middle management does. And Jethro is recognizing the importance of Moses' position, but he wants to limit his workload. And to accomplish this, Moses' first task is to put reliable and capable people in positions of authority. And without this, the whole thing will not work. Now, note that one qualification is that they fear God. And they are to be more concerned about what God can do to them than what they might gain through corruption. Extremely important. And we hear stories from Andy and Karina constantly about the corruption in Uganda. No matter, everywhere you turn, you want to get something done, you've got to grease somebody's palm. Everybody has their hand out. You encounter a policeman on the street, he may stop you for any reason whatsoever, and a little bit of money across the palm will make the problem go away. And it's just over and over and over again. So, anyway, then these responsible leaders are to supervise manageable groups, and they are to render decisions as they feel able. And that those that are too weighty for them are just kicked up the line. And Moses being where the buck stops. So Moses then could take these difficult cases to God, and God is to make the final judgment. And that's not a bad plan. And this organizational structure, or something like it, was common in the nations at the time, usually with the king being at the top of the corporate tree. Now, back when we had a weekend attendance of about 3 times our current attendance, we redid our Constitution and created an operations manual that attempted to do something very similar to this, to decentralize the decision-making process by putting that authority into the hands of those who are doing the ministries. But with a smaller congregation, this structure can at times be a bit bulky. But hopefully we're going to grow back into the organization. So Jethro tells Moses that if he does this, it will reduce his burden and he will not burn himself out. And not only will Moses be a lot happier with it, but so will the people. And so Moses puts the plan into action, and it appears to be working. And with that, Jethro heads home. All right, so chapter 19.
I think one thing that's important to see is that he first has to teach those people God's laws. So he has to make sure that they are solid.
Yeah. Yeah, so that the judgments that they're rendering are according to what God's expectation would be. Yeah.
I think it's interesting too, in 23, if you do this thing and God so commands you, it's like he's suggesting this, but not against what God would say.
Yeah. Take it to God and see if he agrees. Okay. Back to Trevor, 1 through 6.
In the 3rd month from the very day the Israelites left the land of Egypt, they came to the Sinai wilderness. They traveled from Rephidim, came to the Sinai wilderness, and camped in the wilderness. Israel camped there in front of the mountain. Moses went up the mountain to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain, "This is what you must say to the house of Jacob and explain to the Israelites. You have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now if you will carefully listen to me and keep my covenant, you will be my own possession out of all the peoples, although the whole earth is mine. And you will be my kingdom of priests and my holy nation. These are the words that you are to say to the Israelites."
Okay, so the second half of the book is going to deal with the events of Mount Sinai and the beginnings of the Torah, or instruction that God gives to Moses on the mountain. And the Jews are going to be here for a while. According to Numbers chapter 10, they're going to be here for 10 months and 19 days. And so in this chapter, we'll see how God prepares the people to receive his instruction. And so from Rephidim, they come to Mount Sinai, and from the text here, it's evident that they're still in a desert area. And the arrival at Mount Sinai is a fulfillment of the promise that God made to Moses at the burning bush in chapter 3. He told Moses that his arrival would be a sign to him that he would bring the people out of Egypt, and that they would serve God on this mountain. And so here they are. Now, I'm not not sure how the math works out here. In the very first verse here, it actually reads, on the third new moon after the people had gone out of Egypt. But the commentators say that arriving on the third new moon following the Exodus puts it at 7 weeks. I'm not sure how they get to that, but that's what they say. And this is the basis for the celebration of what Jewish holiday? What Jewish holiday is celebrated as 7 weeks? Remember? What's the next holiday after
Pentecost.
Pentecost? Yeah, it's Pentecost. Absolutely. Yeah. So, and Pentecost, which among other things, celebrates the giving of the Torah. Okay. So, to start things off, God gives Moses some words to speak to the Israelites, and this begins the bouncing back and forth between God and Moses, between God and the people. And there's going to be a lot of bouncing, which will include a certain amount of mountaineering as well. And Moses continues to be the middleman here. So through Moses, God reminds the people how they got where they are. God brought them. And from what we've read so far, without God, they never would have made it this far. And then God establishes a covenant with them. He says, if you do this, I will do this. And so the people's job here is to obey and keep. And keep has the idea here of guarding or garrisoning, so that you never let it go, or that it can't be taken away from you. And notice God's asking the people to accept this covenant before they actually know what it is. And so on the basis of what is God asking them to accept this sight unseen?
Faith.
Faith, yeah. But you notice that it isn't blind faith. They're accepted on faith, but it isn't blind faith. It's based on something. It's based on their experience thus far. Okay? Now, our faith isn't blind faith either. We have the written Word of God, and it's there for anyone to read. And the hope is that if one reads it, they will come to a saving faith in Jesus. So, what's God's half of all this? When God says, all the earth is mine, I suspect he's referring to all the people of the earth. Okay? Yahweh is the creator God, and he's responsible for the existence of all people. And this right here is a declaration of monotheism. It had to have been a revelation to them. There are no other gods who can claim ownership to any of the earth's people groups. They are all mine, says the Lord. And out of all the people he could have chosen to call his own as a treasured possession, he will choose them. And this sets them apart from the rest of the nations. And then he tells them that they're going to be a kingdom of priests. I couldn't figure out exactly what to make of this. Now, my first thought was that they're going to be a nation that had priests. But after reading a few commentaries, I came up with a little different opinion of that. What's the purpose of a priest? What does a priest do?
I mean, in their context, it was more of the interceder, right?
Yeah. Yeah, he stands between, doesn't he?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a priest is a go-between, standing between God and humans for the purpose of people understanding God and bringing them closer to him. Okay? So the purpose of the nation of Israel was to represent God to the rest of the world, to show the world who God is, and to bring the world closer to God. Okay, and I didn't hand these verses out, but I want somebody, dear, would you turn to Genesis 12, verses 2 and 3? And Matt, could you look up Deuteronomy 4, 5 and 6? And Harvey, could you look up 1 Peter 2,
Yeah, I was wondering if you were gonna get the priesthood of all believers and see how that connects.
First Peter 2, 5 and 6,
Yeah,
and then also verses 9 and 12. I'll remind you of those
Got it.
there if you
Yep.
can't remember.
no,
Okay? Okay, so dear, what's Genesis 12 say?
How far?
Just 2 and 3.
Okay. And I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you, and make your name great. And so you shall be a blessing, and I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you, I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed.
Okay, and then Deuteronomy chapter 4.
See, I have taught you decrees and laws as the Lord my God commanded me, so that you may follow them in the land you are entering to take possession of it. Observe them carefully, for this will show your wisdom and understanding to the nations who will hear about all these decrees and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people.
Okay, and then we'll follow it up with this one. This is from 1 Peter chapter 2,
verses 4 and 5.
5 and 6.
5 and 6.
5 and 6.
You also, as living stones, are being built up as a spiritual house for a holy priesthood, to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ.
Okay, and then 9 and then 12.
But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for God's own possession, so that you may proclaim the excellencies who have called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. And then to verse 12.
12.
Keep your behavior excellent among the Gentiles, so that in the thing in which they slander you as evildoers, they may, because of your good deeds, as they observe them, glorify God in the day of visitation.
Okay, so God gave the Jews a specific purpose. Who has that job now?
His body, the church.
The church, absolutely. So we're not off the hook, are we? And we're to show the world who God is and to bring the world closer to God.
Just for me, for personal testimony, having grown up in the Catholic Church where it was the priest, to read that verse as a new Christian is like, we're all priests. We serve that role. It's like, it was almost kind of like, I don't know how many times I read and reread that. It's like, wow, that we serve that role.
Sure.
It's not just a person or a couple individuals within the body of Christ. It is the body of Christ, and we all have that.
We are the ones standing between the world and God. Our job is to represent God to the world,
Right.
so that they would draw closer to God.
Right.